Welcome to the Truth in the Public Square podcast, a podcast dedicated to equipping Christians to engage culture and politics for the glory of God and the common good. I'm your host, Harrison Lang, and on today's podcast, I am joined once again with Isaiah Callarman to discuss current cultural and political moments in our nation today. And so thank you so much for joining me once again, Isaiah.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind giving an update. I know that y'all just had your second child a couple months ago, I think now, but wouldn't mind updating the audience of what's going on in your life.
Absolutely. Like you said, we welcomed our second little one into the world in January. She's doing great. We're having fun being a family of four now. And I am pressing on with graduate studies at Hillsdale College in political philosophy and American politics. And the Lord is good. And so today, excited to jump on to have a little conversation about the many events going on in our political and social spheres in American life today. The most obvious one, obviously, being the war in Iran. So let's get started there. What are your, reactions to what we've seen going on over the last several weeks? And time has kind of flown. There's, like many things in our political life at this time, things move really fast. It's hard to kind of keep up with everything, but so far from what we've seen, what are some of your reflections?
Yeah, as you mentioned, how quickly this war has moved along with just the progress every day or step backs, depending on how you are viewing the war. It's like every day or every other day we're seeing a new Ayatollah getting assassinated, and some other Iranian leader getting killed. It's definitely been interesting to follow Twitter during those moments. But I mean, I was actually probably as a young conservative that has some sympathies for the America First anti-war kind of faction of the Republican Party. I wouldn't fully put myself in that camp, but I mean, I would have a lot of similarities there. That okay, I don't want to fight wars on behalf of a foreign nation. But I was actually in support of the Iran attacking Iran, and I'm actually kind of generally happy how things are going on. Not perfect, but I think that's just the part of war. And so when people have been critical on the right, and then obviously the left's going to critique anything that Trump does, I'm in full support of what's going on. There's obviously some things that will be different, and there's some sad portions of it. But I think that it was definitely necessary what was going on, because at absolute bare minimum, Iran could not have a nuclear weapon, and I'm definitely not for let's go bring back basically taking over the nation and being dedicated to a regime change. I think that never goes well typically. But I think that is the next step for America, is that we do need to help with the regime change here, because with how much power the Ayatollah has held over the past 40 years, and in that group, even though they're actually a minority, I think I saw that it was 70% people in the nation of Iran were actually against the current government. Although that's true, I think that we need to help equip them to have a democratic nation, have a democratic society, but that needs to be done wisely and well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Iran, and also on when it comes to the regime change.
Sure. Yeah, I think my perspective, as I've watched things unfold, I would share the sympathy for being hesitant to get entangled in foreign wars. After all, President Trump ran his campaign on the promise of no new wars. And so if...
Reminds you of, no, sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me of the good thing you can't run for re-election unless you some reason tries. But when in 92, 98, in 88, H.W. Bush had no new taxes,
Yes, that's right.
and that destroyed him. And so it definitely it kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
Yes, I've thought of that as well. So he had, politically, I think, needs to execute this war quickly and effectively in order to avoid some serious blowback to the MAGA movement and the GOP in the midterms, and even in the
Hmm.
next general election, or the election in 2028. Um, because yeah, I think there's a growing sentiment on the right of we don't want to get involved in these wars in the Middle East or really anywhere. Like we kind of want to take care of our own house first. We've got lots of problems domestically, which some of those we'll talk about later on in this episode. But at the same time, you got to recognize that America is a global empire, and like it or not, and um, there's so many complicating factors just by virtue of how the American regime relates to the other nations of the world, and there are real problems, real difficulties, real challenges that come with that that are in the national interest, are in the interest of our people. And so, on the one hand, yeah, I give uh, based on his track record so far, I give a lot of deference to the administration, to President Trump. I think his judgment has seemed to be pretty good so far in terms of handling foreign affairs. Um, whether you look at the Venezuela operation or, um, you know, you also don't forget in the first year of his term how many little kind of skirmishes and wars he sort of negotiated and into. So his objective seems to be in all of these things securing America's interest and doing everything he can to put an end to wars that are happening. Um, and so, yeah, well, I definitely would, I've never loved the idea over the last couple of years as this conversation has gone on. Never really loved the idea of going and invading Iran. I was actually quite nervous when we struck Iran last year. I was kind of like, what's going to happen here? Is this going to boil over into something bigger? Thankfully, it did not. Um, this time around, it's like, okay, we're going in, we're taking out the Ayatollah, and so my stance at the moment really is just I'm going to wait and see what happens. Just pray uh, that the Lord would allow this conflict to end quickly. When it comes to what to do next, I think that's a very challenging question. On the one hand, we certainly don't want a reincarnation of the previous Iranian regime. At the same time, I think, and what many people recognize is we also we shouldn't try to reproduce American, democracy there because it's a different country with different history and different traditions, and we shouldn't expect to be able to just kind of drop a new kind of system of government onto them. As we've seen, that's not we've tried to do that in the past, and it hasn't always worked too well.
Well,
So
sorry to interrupt, but do you remember the what was the country that it was like West Africa that we set up their constitution? It was like I mean, this is sad how this handled, but there's like a after the Civil War, there was a couple 100,000 like slaves that we basically sent back to Africa, and we instituted a nation there. I can't remember what the nation was
Liberia,
called. Liberia,
is that what you're
yeah,
thinking of? Yeah,
yeah, and that did not go well, and that has not gone well. And these are
sure.
people who were in the United States
Yeah,
during that
yeah,
time. Now, of course, they were restricted actually to use the constitutional system, unfortunately. And that's a tragic thing that we realize in our nation's history, that they were unable to be involved in civic responsibilities. But here's people who were released around it, and even they struggle with the with the American democracy. What I was saying earlier when it comes to basically helping up set up the next regime, we just need to basically not have it be people that were involved in the Ayatollah. Is what I'm trying to say,
sure. Yeah,
and at least heading on that direction. I don't know what that is, how that's going to look like. One thing also when it comes to Iran, I think that would be also helpful to talk about is when it comes to was it right before the Lord? Was it right? Was it the right decision ethically for Trump to attack Iran? Was it 2 Saturdays ago now? What would be your evaluation on that? I know that there's some conversations there, among Christian circles of whether that was a justified use of war.
yeah. I think on the one hand, it's an easy question in terms of principle. We have the Christian just war tradition, that kind of gives us some helpful moral guidelines for how do we understand if a war is justified, and how do we also think about carrying out a war in a just way. Um, I think, yeah, generally speaking, kind of unprovoked, preemptive attacks are out of bounds in kind of that Christian tradition. But um, again, there's I think both me personally and I think in general the American public, there's also a lot of information about this whole situation that we don't really know.
Mhm.
There's intelligence, um, there's a long history of tensions here. I mean, and I've heard make the argument essentially that, well, Iran has kind of been at war with America for a long time.
Mhm.
So it's not as if they were just some nation sitting there peacefully and we went and, just suddenly decided to invade. So I think on the one hand, just as an outsider looking in, it can look a little bit like, well, they weren't actively attacking us, so is
Mhm.
this justified? On the other hand, I think you have to recognize they're, um, the people in leading our country who have authority over these kinds of decisions have access to information and responsibility that the general public does not have. And so that's not to say they're going to make the right decision every time, but um, again, this is kind of why my stance right now is sort of wait and see.
Mhm.
There's a lot we don't know about not only how things will unfold, but how history will look back on all of this. Um, so I recognize, yeah, there's lots of complicated factors here. I generally would love to see us not invading other countries, but sometimes I recognize war is a reality in our fallen world, um, and sometimes it is justified, and so um, yeah, that's just I think my encouragement to Christians listening to this is, you know let's first pray for our leaders and for our military, and this conflict is underway, so just pray that the Lord would protect our soldiers and give wisdom to our leaders as they kind of try to navigate all of this and decide what the objectives are. And even when we talk about, yeah, what comes after, all there's a very difficult questions and very important questions, but also just, yeah, pray that the hostilities would come to an end quickly, and just, yeah, kind of before jumping to kind of immediate judgments on everything, just kind of just maybe wait to kind of see how things play out while praying that peace would come quickly. I think that's kind of the way I've kind of think is best to approach these things at the moment, knowing what we know, and the stage we're at. So
Yeah, how would you evaluate I'd be curious, how would you evaluate with, or critique those or even affirm, I'd love to hear what you would say about those is that, "Hey, we're fighting wars on behalf of Israel. This is Israel's war, not ours." What would you say to that, mainly conservatives? 'Cause I think there's people in our circles that would say that, and,
sure,
how can we respond to that faithfully? And, like, where's it a yes, but you kind of are missing this?
sure, yeah. I don't know. This is one of those topics that um I'll just confess I don't have a super strong opinion on. Again, part of this is just because I just realized, like, geopolitics and the way, the decision process that's made by our leaders and everything is, there's more to it than the popular level conversation and what you what you see on X. I mean,
Mhm.
um, a lot of I think there's a good likelihood that you know a lot of the most vocal opponents of this war, were they in the position of President Trump, would have taken the same action. And of course,
Mm.
you know, assuming that the reasons are legitimate.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah, I don't want to just kind of whitewash and out of hand just assume everything's perfectly fine and there's no bad motives or anything like that. That's possible, but I don't know. And so, you know, there is my position on this has really just to kind of admit where I don't know things, and yeah, I mean there's complications. There's always, I mean, in our founders warned about getting too entangled in even foreign alliances. They were hesitant to. They really tended to be of the mind that um, we need to kind of take care of our own house and really prioritize when it comes to foreign policy. Our main priority, especially early on, when you think about, say, the Monroe Doctrine, which is really our main priority in terms of foreign policy, is keeping European nations from meddling in the American continents. At the time, that was the main threat, um, and for to America's national security. And you see people talking about this today. It's like maybe we should sort of recapture that, where it's not that we are totally withdrawn from all. That I think some people want to see a sort of isolationism that I just don't think is practical, because the world today is so interconnected, and by virtue of modern military technology, and like you have to be engaged on the world stage.
Yep.
But I do sympathize, again, like I I sympathize a lot with people who want to see us avoid getting entangled in alliances or meddling in things internationally that don't directly benefit us. At the same time, I think in this case, I think there's reason to believe that there are significant American interests at stake here. Obviously, Israel stands to benefit a lot from the fall of Iran. I mean,
Yeah.
um, and but also, I mean, so do pretty much all the other Middle Eastern states. um, and I think this is something that maybe isn't talked about as much as, like, I mean, Saudi Arabia and UAE and all these other Sunni Arab states also hate Iran and would love to see regime change in Iran as well. So
Mm.
it's not as if, everyone loves Iran except Israel. And
It's only
um,
China and Russia, and they're just doing it for
sure,
they're only doing it for political reasons.
yeah, I mean, almost all of Iran's neighbors are are at odds with Iran, and that's not to, yeah, I mean, that's again not to just say, oh, so therefore any action against them is good. It's just to recognize, look, there's a lot going. I mean, there's so many layers to this whole situation. We haven't even begun to talk about the religious aspect of this, which
Hmm.
is, Americans maybe don't talk about quite as much, but and secular Westerners, but that's a big part of this too. Is the religion of Islam, and you know there's divides there, and that's part of why there's enmity between Iran and the other its Arab neighbors. Is there's divides, and even within their own religion, and it's just a mess of a situation. And I think, um, yes, while I'd love to see America stay focused on its own interest and not get drawn into, you know, quagmires overseas. There there are times, I think, when aggressive action like this are justified. Is it this time? I think there's reason to believe it might be. Um, but I think things will become clearer with time. And yeah, again, I think the main thing I would urge Christians to do is just pray that peace would come quickly, and regardless of all the other factors, I think that's the most important thing. And I think that I do think, on the bright side, I think that is, especially considering his track record, President Trump's objective in all of these things has not been to just create some, you know, needless war machine. It's been to eliminate causes of potential wars or to settle existing wars. And so hopefully he's able to accomplish that objective. And the end result is, you know, um, the restoration of peace for the long term. Of course, um, that's not something we can ever assume, but let's pray that that does happen.
Yeah, that's one thing that's really bothered me a lot with those on the right. And it's again, I have a lot. I lean more this way when it comes to the Tucker Carlson crowd that are anti-war, and pushing it back against, like, hey, why are we fighting these needless wars and
Yep.
for Israel when there's so many issues that are stateside, and even in general, like the nation's responsibility should be for its own people first, and then, which is true.
Yep.
It just is, and I have a lot of sympathy there, but the one thing they seem to always forget is that Iran is like the Iran regime is like the textbook definition of evil. It's not like, hey, they're bad, but they have some good. Like there's nothing good about the Iran regime, and there's nothing that we could trust them with. Like there is nothing that we can. I mean, it goes back to the late '70s when it comes to the revolution. They took Americans hostage, and it took
Hmm.
Ronald Reagan to help get those hostages back. And so this regime has been totally wicked and evil since the beginning. And again, doesn't necessarily mean that it's America's responsibility to take them out. It doesn't mean that,
Sure.
but
Right. Yep.
I think that we should also give the president more benefit of the doubt when it comes
Yeah.
to his attack on Israel, and knowing that there's some intelligence that we don't know about,
That's
that,
right.
that said that, hey, we need to have this is the time to attack, and so that's helpful. Moving from the foreign affairs now to stateside. One of the most important conversations for conservatives now is the Save America Act. The act basically to require voter ID across the nation to help entrust our elections are fraud free. And so I would love to hear your initial thoughts on that, and if you think that there's any chance that it'll get passed soon.
Yeah. So I think this is a super important piece of legislation. Obviously, yeah, I think anyone paying attention to the national conversation will have heard about this. Um, President Trump posted a couple of days ago a little 5-point summary of the Save America Act, and I'll just read that real quickly. One, all voters must show voter ID. Two, all voters must show proof of citizenship in order to vote. So I don't know if that means if that's related to the voter registration side or if that's like an addition, like you have to, I assume that doesn't mean you have to
I
also
think that's
bring
the true is the true idea, real
real
ID,
ID. Okay,
real
yeah.
idea. And
Okay,
so
that
like
makes
if
sense.
someone
Yeah.
doesn't have a real ID, I think they have to bring like a social security number or
Birth certificate, passport, yeah, something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
something in
Okay.
addition.
Yeah.
But when it comes to if you have the real idea, then you should be good.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yep. Uh, three, no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military, or travel. Four, yeah, the main headline issues are those three, but there's a couple other things that have been packaged into it apparently. Four is no men and women's sports, and five is no transgender mutilation surgery for children. Um, so kind of a package deal of some important priorities for the administration, um, things that I think the majority of Americans support. Um, and I think all things that Christians should pray would prevail in Congress. Obviously, we would love to see, especially when it comes to the question of transgender operations. You know, I would love to see all of them uh, outlawed, regardless of whether
Yep.
you're a child or not. I think
Hmm.
we should agree that you know this kind of activity is egregiously against nature and God's design for the human body, and just simply should not be allowed for a host of reasons. Not, I mean, that's I think the most important one for Christians, but not to mention like the fact that these kinds of procedures are incredibly harmful to people physically, and we could go on about that for a while. But um, setting that aside, the interesting and you know the reason why we're talking about this is the fact that this legislation has seemingly repeatedly been running into hurdles in the legislative process. Um, it's getting no Democrat votes, which isn't entirely surprising, especially when you consider the those latter two pieces of it and their unwavering allegiance to the any cause of the LGBTQ movement. But what's fascinating is even when it comes to the voting security, the election security measures, we've seen over the last several weeks, repeatedly, even outlets like CNN running polls showing, hey, like 70 to 75% of Democrat voters are all in favor of this. And yet, not a single Democrat, to my knowledge, in Congress is willing to vote for these things. Um, you would think, though, given that most Democrats and an even more overwhelming share of Republicans support these measures, you would think that it would move quickly through the legislative process and be on President Trump's desk, but it has been hitting roadblocks primarily in the Senate. Obviously, it passed the House by the narrow Republican margin there. In the Senate, the roadblock it has bumped into is the what is it called, the silent filibuster or
Yeah.
whatever, and the many people would be familiar with the requirement of 60 votes essentially to end a debate on a measure and bring it to a vote, which essentially effect for all intents and purposes means is to pass anything through the Senate you need 60 votes, um, out
And
of
to
100.
further explain for the audience, because this is one thing that not everyone always knows about, but
Sure.
it's a simple majority to pass a bill, but to end the discussion, as you mentioned, is you have to get 60. And so what that means for us and for conservatives who want the Save America Act passed is that you have to convince, is it like eight or seven um, Democrats to
Yeah,
basically vote to end discussion,
yeah,
and they're doing that knowing that this is going to get
right.
passed.
Yeah, that's right.
Is the big
Right.
conversation.
So it's essentially a veto power. And yeah, this particular question has been debated uh, amongst conservatives and Christians over the last several months. Do we should the Senate Republican majority pass a rule change to essentially get rid of this buffer in order to pass this legislation? Should they leave it in place? I've heard arguments made. I am not familiar with all the ins and outs and the details essentially, but I've heard arguments made that there actually wouldn't be any rule changes required. It's simply really it is just kind of up to, I believe, Senate leadership on the Republican side to um, I guess there's some procedural things they could do to enforce the talking filibuster, which is the kind of the old-fashioned traditional means of filibustering, which basically is, where senators will try to hold up a vote on a piece of legislation by just talking
Yeah,
nonstop. If you
Corey,
ever
we're calling you, Corey Booker,
Yeah,
man.
Cory Booker, yeah, or if you ever seen the film
We
Mr.
need you.
Smith Goes to
Let's hear you talk
Washington.
for 24 hours. Unfortunately, right?
Yeah. So is that is what people have been uh, people on the right have been calling for, is especially over the last few weeks, is like, okay, we don't actually need to change the rules. Let's make the Democrats talk. Let's make them protest talk this vote until we wear them out and we pass the vote. Essentially, is kind of what has been advocated, but Republican leadership in the Senate has not been willing to do that so far. Um, and why that is a great question, especially when this issue is, I mean, being loudly demanded both by the president and by their constituencies. Um, and so there's kind of a lot of ongoing politics. You know, between the time of recording right here and when we publish this episode, things could have changed. Potentially, it seems like this is a very live conversation, especially when we consider, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, the Texas Senate race plays in here as well, because um, John Cornyn, incumbent senator from Texas, is I believe, I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure what role he plays, but he's close with Senate leadership in the Senate, and so there's some tug of war going on there to try to get Senate leadership uh, to enforce the talking filibuster and try to get the Save America Act passed. So, yeah, a lot of complicated political procedural things going on there. But kind of zooming out big picture, I think this is something that kind of on both ends, whether it's the the election security side of things, or the women's sports and transgender procedures provisions of this bill, all things I think all Christians should enthusiastically get behind. Um, and really, I think are issues that actually do unify Americans across even generally across political divides. I think, um, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, everyone wants fair elections. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about for a long time over the last, especially since the Trump era. I mean, there's been constant back and forth accusations of, you know, meddling in the elections, and this has been an ongoing conversation. Obviously, that's probably, given where we are politically, that's probably going to continue. But at least, hey, we have these standard uniform guidelines for who gets to vote and how it gets to be done that minimize as much as possible the potential for fraud. I think that's something almost everybody can and should get behind. And then obviously, when it comes to protecting women's sports and protecting children from, yeah, essentially from these, just horrible mutilation procedures that have been undertaken in the name of this insane ideology of transgenderism and the like. Yeah, these are things that everyone should get behind, I think. And in reality, I think, yeah, obviously things Christians should get behind, and I think also the vast majority of Americans actually want. And so, yeah, it's something I think we should all pray that, yeah, the Lord would kind of move these procedural political blockers to get this through. And yeah, again, regardless of where you fall politically, I think these are all things we should want. So,
Well, and when it comes to like what are the Democrats' concerns or opposition to the Save America Act, they're just totally baseless. So, firstly, for the easiest one, the um, when it comes to transgender kids and basically allowing, I mean, what they want is what they've been shown themselves in California is that what they want is that parents lose their parental rights when their children when transition as under the age of 18 is that they should not be notified of that happening at school, and the school actually partner along with them, the student with a transition to another gender. That's what they want, and so obviously they're going to be against that, and that's just totally asinine, totally wicked, totally evil, unhelpful, actually truly harming to those kids who are struggling with gender dysphoria, um, dys, dysmorphia, children dysphoria. Thank you.
dysphoria. Yeah.
Yeah. I was drawing the name. I'm sure that everyone can hear, but I was definitely under the weather this past week, and so definitely not totally fully mentally there. But yeah, so they are. It's actually not helpful for them. And let's all remember when we have these conversations. Especially when it comes to the kids, the children are the victims here. It's not, and so let's not make them. Uh, let's be sure we're kind and gracious to transgender children in our communities and around us, because they're the ones that have been harmed by the school districts, by progressive ideology, by Marxism. They're the ones that have been influenced by this negatively, and they're the ones being truly affected. And so, but that still means we need to fight back against it and like be honest and tell them, hey, like you are not a woman if they're a biological male. You cannot transition to that, we need to tell them the truth, but we also must tell it in love. This is a different conversation on a different topic, but I think it really relates here. I forgot who mentioned it. It was some Southern Baptist pastor, but said if you remain quiet on the topic of homosexuality to a friend or someone that you'll get invited to a gay wedding. But if you tell them the truth in love, you will attend someone's who is formerly a homosexual. You'll attend their wedding one day, and so basically saying that how important it is just to be honest and straightforward with people. And I think that this is pertinent to this topic as well. But then when it comes to the voter ID conversation, which is uh, the main portion of the bill. If Republicans feel like they had to delete anything, they would delete probably maybe I don't know. It's a hard thing that I don't think they delete maybe the transgender kid stuff, but the main talking point of this bill is the voter ID conversation. And what the Democrats would say is that it's racist, it's harmful, it's going to actually make our elections undemocratic, which is very ironic. But their claims are just totally baseless. There's nothing that's grounded in truth that they're what they're trying to say. And so they'll say that it's racist because it makes it harder for African American communities perhaps to be able to attain a real ID that proves their citizenship. And I'm like, firstly, if anything, that's actually racist towards African Americans in the United States, thinking that they can't get it. If anyone's being racist, it's actually the Democrats, but they're not ready for that conversation. And so, all that being said, is we really need to put the pressure on the Senate majority leadership to really try to get this passed, because I think this is not just good for Republicans, this is good for our nation. And I think that's what
Mhm.
our bills really should be. It should be primarily this is good for our nation. Of course, at some points it's going to be partisan. At some points it's going to be partisan, but not having kids be mutilated and having fair elections, I think that's pretty bipartisan
Yeah,
conversation or bill that we should be having. And so
absolutely.
let's move forward on when it comes to the Senate majority leadership, which John Cornyn is very close with the Senate majority leadership. He recently was in a primary race, and that's now in a runoff election. What were your thoughts on? It was a Tuesday night when we kind of got that news of that it's going to runoff election. What's your
Mhm.
thoughts with that race in Texas? And then also in a few moments we can talk about the Democratic side in Texas.
Mhm. Yeah, as a former Texas resident, in my earlier in my childhood, uh, I always kind of interested to see what's going on in Texas politics. It's an interesting, always, yeah, interesting to see how things play out because obviously a very large state, pretty consistently a red state, generally speaking, but because it's such a large state and so consequential in the national conversation, always gets a lot of attention. There's always often a lot of drama around the races there, and so yes, the what's everybody's talking about right now is the race for the Senate seat there, which is currently two senators in uh, Texas are Senator Ted Cruz and Senator John Cornyn, both of whom have been in those seats for a decent amount of time now. Um, and so what's going on right now is Senator Cornyn is facing challenges to his incumbency. Initially, it was a three-way race between Senator Cornyn, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and current representative from, I believe, the Houston area,
Mhm.
Wesley Hunt. And um, I can't remember what the threshold is in Texas, but essentially you have to get a certain, you have to hit a certain threshold of the percentage of the vote to,
50% simple majority, and
yeah,
so
simple majority. No candidate received a simple majority. And so it's going to a runoff between Paxton and Cornyn, who were the top two. Um, Paxton is viewed and is branding himself as kind of a more loyal MAGA, more aligned with President Trump candidate, and kind of trying to depict Cornyn as simply a kind of a old guard mainstream Republican who's not really on the side of the MAGA movement, which I think is a fair characterization just from what I've heard. Definitely seems to be a pretty true characterization. But the interesting thing going on right now is because Cornyn is a sitting senator and is higher up in Senate leadership, uh, he is instrumental in this whole conversation around the Save America Act. And so I believe a couple of days ago, Ken Paxton offered to drop out of the race if the Senate does commit to going ahead and passing the Save America Act. And President Trump is also withholding his endorsement between the two candidates. Essentially, I saw something today. Not sure if this is 100% true or where everything stands currently, but It sounds like President Trump is basically saying, I want the Save America Act on my desk before I endorse anyone in this race. And so essentially what's happening is President Trump is putting pressure on Senator Cornyn to get things moving with the Save America Act, by means of um, kind of putting pressure on this primary race. And so yeah, a lot going on there in that, and it's simply at this point a Republican primary, but lots of implications for the national stage.
When it comes down to the kind of the negatives towards this, why this needs to be figured out soon of who's going to be the GOP nominee in Texas, is there is a pretty strong candidate on the Democratic side when it comes to some sort of populist movement. It's going to be popular among young people. He's getting a lot of more people in the nation probably know who James Talarico is now than John Cornyn, and Ken Paxton. I bet you even Texans is probably generally true because we live in a social media age. And one thing to give Talarico credit, he does very good with social media, and he's been very, very, very popular. In the sense of his videos have been getting millions and millions of views. What would be some of your thoughts on the initial thoughts when James Talarico won against Jasmine Crockett? Is that
Mhm.
isn't Jasmine her first name?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
Mhm.
so I was drawing a blank for a second. I was like, I knew Crockett was for her last name, but yeah. What were your thoughts on the Democratic primary?
Yes, you got Talarico is, I believe, current sitting representative, I believe, in the Texas state legislature.
Yeah, he's somewhere in the state
Uh,
legislature. I can't remember if it's Senate or
yeah, I'm not sure
but
which chamber, but um, so he's sitting legislator in the Texas State House. Jasmine Crockett sitting U.S. representative from Texas. Um, both uh, pretty well known figures from the left side of the aisle. Um, kind of, yeah, from what I've seen, not I I pay more attention to sort of the big picture of what's going on politically. So I'm not too deeply familiar with all these figures in terms of their history and their persona, but just from my perspective, kind of you've got on the one hand Representative Crockett, who's just kind of a very brash, um,
trashy.
outspoken, yeah, just kind
Yeah.
of uh, tries to really play up the shock value
Hmm.
of kind of everything she does and says. And then on the other hand, you've got Talarico, who similarly, I would say, kind of out there, but his persona is much more polished and much more professional. He
He's
presents
Mr.
himself,
Rogers.
yeah. He presents himself as just this, very thoughtful and religious person. But his ideas are just as far out there if you listen to him talk. I mean, there was a great montage on the Michael Knowles show the other day of just like running through all these things that he's said over the last few years, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, this guy is as far left radical as it gets. Um, and yeah, interesting to see kind of that dynamic play out. It seems like the Democrat establishment wanted him rather than Representative Crockett in that for the nomination, and that they were successful. I believe he raised a decent amount more money,
Mhm.
and obviously, yes, won his primary. Um, on
He
the one
won
hand,
very convincingly too. He won. I can't remember the exact, but I think it was like more than 5 points that he won
okay,
against
yeah,
Jasmine Crockett. And
so
then, do you also notice the Dallas County voting issues? Did you see that?
I'm not familiar. No,
So basically, voting closed 2 hours late in Dallas because there was issues about getting people in and through. I didn't look too
interesting.
much into what the issues were, but Jasmine Crockett complained that which is funny. I mean, it's just totally asinine. But she was like, the Republicans, of course, are destroying my chances for the Democratic nominee, and
Mm,
they're the reasons that caused
yes.
this in Dallas County. So this is why they caused this to happen, because that's where she's from, that area. She's from the Dallas area, and so this is where she was
Okay.
hoping to get a lot of her votes from. Like she needed to be like 75% in that area to
Yeah.
be able to ultimately get the nomination. But biggest city and biggest metropolitan area in Texas, so it could have been, a very big win for her. But I think she forgot that she was running against a Democrat. Maybe because that he called himself a Christian and was quoting the Bible all the time, although out of context. I maybe she thought she was running against a conservative, but that was a yeah, an interesting part of the night was that that she didn't ever concede that night. She when it was shown that she lost, but she was like, "We're gonna have to go figure out this tomorrow because I don't believe that this is has been a fair election." So I don't know if you should look that up. It'd be a very interesting
That's
little rabbit
that's
trail.
that's amusing, especially considering that Dallas County is solidly Democrat
Yeah,
county. And so
I'm sure the election board over there is not a Republicans. I can probably
I'd be
guarantee that.
surprised. I mean, it is funny because the mayor of Dallas is a Republican currently. It who although he was elected a Democrat, and then shortly after his election, I believe this was a couple, maybe 2 3 years ago, he announced, "Hey guys, I'm actually Republican now." He's term limited, so it was like his last term, and he came out as Republican on his last term. So, um, yeah, that made a lot of people upset. But
So that's what we're gonna do actually for Dusty Devers. What we're gonna do is actually have him run for the Democratic ticket, and then
there you go.
just have him move to like California. He's gonna run for governor. Actually, who cares about the U.S. Senate in Oklahoma? And then once he gets elected, hey guys, I'm actually like I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, and that's how we're gonna take over the world, right? And so,
That's right.
joking aside, I think this is a really pivotal race. I don't know how you feel, and I don't like talking about feelings too much because sometimes they're grounded away from reality. But I'm a little worried with Talarico that he could end up defeating Cornyn or Paxton because both of them have their own issues. I think Cornyn would not get as much of the MAGA vote, and with not having um, not being a 2028, 2032, being a presidential election year, I'm worried that could affect him negatively. And then when it comes to Talarico, I think that he's going to get young voters out. I mean, the reports is that there was numerous young people in a lot of the cities that had more Democrat voting in the Democratic primaries. Young people were just showing up, and so
Mhm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. If you have any worries with Talarico actually ultimately winning that seat, and also what that might mean for the future of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a large effort underway to cast Talarico as a serious threat in Texas. Um, Whether or not that's actually true, I think, is an open question. We've seen this, we've seen this before. Is my first knee jerk reaction with Beto O'Rourke. He was similar, like he comes out, he kind of his persona was maybe a little different, maybe a little more bombastic, uh, but he was cast as kind of this phenom appealing to the young people, um, you know kind of the figurehead who's gonna get a blue vote for Texas. And he has lost every election he has run for. He's challenged Senator Ted Cruz, I believe, a couple of times. He's run for governor, and similar, like every time he's kind of drummed up as like, "Oh, this is our guy. He's gonna stick it to whoever it is he's running," and he ends up losing. Um, Texas is still a pretty solidly red state. Um, I will add, thanks to immigration from California. So I read a fascinating statistic. I think this was the 2020 election. so a couple presidential elections ago, uh, it, that essentially Texas is still a solidly red state because of voters who have moved in over the last 5 to 10 years. So if you tally up kind of existing population, it's close to a swing state, if not a blue state. But with the massive influx of people from places like California over the last several years who are getting out because of the wacky blue politics there, they're like, heck no, and voting pretty
I've heard this
conservative.
before. I'm not voting for this Gavin
Yeah,
Newsom wannabe. So
yeah. And so, I mean, there's been a huge, yeah, and then I believe that's continued over the last several years. Big influx of more conservative voters into states like Texas. And so, you know, Texas, yeah, I think is a state where Democrats like to, they really like it's close enough that they're not totally crazy for acting like they have a chance. Like I think it's not inconceivable. I think it could happen. I do think it's still probably unlikely, unless there's all kinds of things that could play out in terms of who gets the nomination on the Republican side of the ticket. Uh, if there's a real problem that the voter base has with the nominee and they're just not willing to support him, I think that's like you kind of alluded to. I think that's really the only situation where I see Talarico having a shot is if the nominee for the Republican side of the ticket just does not have much support,
mhm.
lackluster support, then that's where I think the danger could be for the Republicans there. But if the Republican base in Texas can just unite around whoever the nominee is, I would be really surprised if he pulls it off. I think uh, he would really have to command a massive kind of turnout for his side
Mhm.
uh, compared to what we've seen over the last many election cycles, whether it's presidential election or Senate elections or governor elections. Democrats have repeatedly like tried to kind of produce some kind of big momentum, and nothing has really come of it so far. And the influx of red voters from other states, I think, has really kind of kept that from happening. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious to see how it happens. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he really does have a shot. But I would be surprised if it's a real contest.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, in 2024, I just looked up the numbers. Trump won by 14 points. Now, granted, Kamala Harris was a weak candidate,
that's right.
and
Unpopular.
Trump says, excuse me, Trump was a strong candidate, well, at least politically. And then I looked at Beto O'Rourke's history when he ran against in 2018, pardon me, against Ted Cruz. He only lost by 2.5 points there.
Hmm. Yeah, he
And
cut it
then
close a couple times. Yeah.
yeah, the governor race in 2022 against Greg Abbott, he lost by 11 points.
Yeah.
Abbott's, polarizing, but very liked, at least in the Republican Party in Texas, and so not necessarily too surprising there. My concern is what you just mentioned about there's not a united support for that U.S. Senate candidate in Texas, and so my issue is if like I think if the nominee is figured out before the next election, the primary election for the Republican ticket for the Senate. If the nomination's figured out, I would be a lot less worried. Where I would be worried at is if Paxton and Cornyn have to go at each other more. You're just giving fuel to the fire. Talarico's going to be able to run on, the next month about how they can't get this figured out, how they have two weak candidates in the Republican Party, which you would say in general that they're weak in general and bad candidates. But I think that could be very convincing to some swing voters, and also with him being a little more, he speaks a little more candor, and I think it's a little more convincing to a lot of Texans. That being said, I do think that some people at some point are going to kind of um, find out that he's kind of bullcrapping them. I'm trying to think of a better word, but is that I mean just his policies are just horrendous. I want to give him some charity and think that he probably does care for the Texas people, but his policies will not actually help Americans, let alone Texans. And so, is there any kind of final thoughts you have on that race, and just what can Christians do to evaluate this race and also everything else we talked about going on in the nation?
Yeah, I think it's it's interesting to see how a race that's more localized can have such broader impact on national politics. Obviously, Texas is a place where we do see that more often, just because Texas is a consequential state. But I think, yeah, I mean, a takeaway for believers is pay attention to what's going on in your state. Um, Recognize that things that go on there actually do have an impact on national conversation um, in sometimes pretty big ways. And I think the first place we should go to seek, serious reforms and improvements in the politics of our country is local and state politics, because the way the American system is set up, it things move up, essentially, especially if there's a population in a state or locality that's really engaged. Um, Even though, yeah, the American regime today is greatly deformed from its original intent, and there is a lot of government by the unelected, unfortunately. Um, there's still avenues to impact things, and there's state level races, local races still impact the national state of play, and just yeah, to keep that in mind, um, and honestly, I would say to even prioritize uh,
Mm.
in terms of where you put your attention, and if you're to the extent that you're politically engaged, most people are not positioned to engage what's going on at DC directly, but they do have an avenue to talk to and interact with and um, shape the leadership and policy of their local and state level governments. So
Well, even when it comes down to what we just mentioned, the Save Act, those policies that were in the Save Act, you could lobby for, you could seek with your uh, state representatives for those same laws we pass in your own state, and say, hey, at the bare minimum, if we can't pass this thing nationally, at the bare minimum, in Missouri, in Kansas, Arkansas, Texas, Oklahoma, or wherever you live, that's not going to happen here. We are going to have fair elections. We are going to protect children who are struggling with gender dysphoria, and all that. I think that's a really helpful thing that we can still fight for as conservatives in our constitutional republic, and how it's structured is that fighting for that. Now, I think mainly for our national elections, we really need to fight um, for election integrity. So that's a big priority. We can't just neglect it. That's an area that obviously we should care about what our national government's doing, what's going on with the war in Iran. Um, that's a federal government's responsibility. That's not Texas's responsibility. That's the reason why we have a constitution. That's the reason why we are the United Nations, the United States. And so I think that's very, very, very helpful. And so, well, thank you, Isaiah, for joining me. Hopefully we can do it sometime soon, and then just hopefully that you're just pressing on in your studies.
it's a pleasure to join.